Great. I want to thank you guys for joining us today for our Fall 2015 Student Survey Coordinator Training. We have Anna Bryant from MNPS today, and she will go ahead and start us off um, with just an overview of what we're doing.
Sure. Hey, everybody. This has been a partnership with our Research Evaluation and Assessment team and our Talent Management team, along with Ryan, as we have put together our student survey for this year. We wanted to just briefly go over the agenda and then also why we believe in student surveys and why we think they're important for formative feedback for teacher practice. So what we're going to talk about today is give you a little bit of background on the surveys and then some logistical information that will be helpful in the management of the process. And then at the end, we have some school-based presentation slides for coordinators if you need to go through this process with your teachers. And then for the last few minutes of this webinar, we wanted to give you some planning time to work out the logistics of how you're going to implement the survey, and we will be online for you to chat and ask questions as well. So why student surveys? Why is this something that the district has really bought into and rallied around? We believe that because students have the most contact with teachers and they are the direct consumers of teacher service, that they are able to provide valuable feedback to teachers. We think that this is a way for them to be reflective and help them grow and change in their practice. And also to create some student buy-in and to empower students to engage them in their learning experience with their educators.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And
Sure.
I'm going to come in and do a little bit of some of the research on student surveys. What we found is that student surveys really are predictive of student achievement. So teachers who score well on surveys also tend to have students who make larger gains in achievement. We've seen in a lot of cases that they're even more accurate than predicting student achievement than self-ratings, observations, or principal summative evaluations. And then finally, we also see that teachers who do more of the practice on these types of surveys have higher levels of engagement as well as efficacy or their confidence in their subject. So we're seeing more engaged and more confident students when teachers are doing these practices more often. The way that we created the survey, and this is a survey that was created within Metro Nashville by Metro. I'll talk a little bit about the process, but it went through, we're trying to make sure we're measuring what we think we're measuring. So we start in the middle, we're trying to establish construct validity, which is just that, are you measuring what you think you're measuring? And you use a variety of sources of evidence for that. We start at the top and we think about content validity. Are you asking the right types of questions? Is it the right types of behaviors? And so we started with the team observation rubric to align our behaviors, and I'll show you an example of that in just a second. Second, we also did interviews with teachers to make sure that they thought the questions were fair, that they applied to a variety of different subjects. And we partnered with MNEA in order to make sure that teachers were attending the focus groups and were able to give their opinions. The next thing we did is we interviewed students, where MNPS staff went to schools within the district and asked students about the questions, what they thought they mean, and what examples they had for it. And so they were able to really hear if they weren't understanding the same thing, if they weren't understanding the same pieces about the questions. And then the last part we did at a spring pilot in the spring about looking at, does it have a relationship with things like value added and observations and so forth. So these are part of it. To get to the questions, we align these to the teaching rubric, and I wanted to give you some examples of that. For instance, there might be a standard that says, the lesson starts promptly. That is something students are able to observe, and so the question is, we start working right when class begins. Well, you see there's another standard. The lesson structure is coherent with a beginning, middle, and end. In this case, students really aren't able to understand something like lesson structure. So it's not an appropriate question for students, so we don't have a question that's aligned to that. But then you can say the lesson time includes time for reflection. Before the end of the lesson, my teacher reviews what we have just learned. So we started directly with standard and made a corresponding questions. These questions then were vetted through the teacher focus groups, student interviews, and the pilot test in the spring of 2015. Some example questions, I think this is really helpful for teachers to be able to see, is that it's not about my teacher has nice shoes or they're the nicest person in the block. It's about specific teacher practices. So and ask questions like, I have a chance to ask questions about what we are learning. My teacher corrects students so they're not when they do not follow the rules, or we are learning or working during the entire class. So these are the types of questions we're asking, and this is the type of feedback that we find to be most helpful for teachers to get from. One of the things that teachers often mention as a concern is the idea of students not taking the survey seriously. So we wanted to build in some safeguards to make sure that that didn't happen. So it's a targeted approach. So for instance, if a student either is rushing through the survey, we have ways to detect that. If they are answering the same answer all the way down the line, then we have ways to look at that. If they're answering questions very differently than other students in the class on a regular basis, we know that something different is going on, and we identify those surveys and we eliminate them. So the only surveys that go into the feedback reports are the ones that have gone through these screening procedures. And this is something that really alleviates some of those concerns that teachers might be having about this being an opportunity for retribution or whatever you want to call it. The teacher feedback reports, they're similar as the reports that we used last year with updated categories for the new MNPS Student Voice Survey. You can see an example on our website, and we have the link there. And then the other, we collected a lot of feedback during the fall of last year to make sure this was a useful tool. And we got some really good feedback from teachers about, we had over 70% say that the feedback would influence their practice, that it was accurate, and that it was helpful from that survey. So important information about this semester. Student surveys are not part of a teacher's evaluation. They are only for formative purposes and used for feedback. They'll be administered in grades 3 through 12. They'll be administered online in the fall and the spring. And during the fall, the administration window will be November 2nd through November 20th. So what is your responsibility as a survey coordinator? Primarily, the responsibility is to serve as the point person. So to be able to lead the student survey coordination at your school. That looks like developing a survey administration plan and coordinating that administration, giving a brief introduction to your school faculty about the student survey. And we've provided some sample slides that you can use, and I'll show you in a bit. To give out the proctor instructions, we'll talk more about that. And as well as afterwards is assisting teacher in using these results to help them drive instruction, setting up the conversations with instructional leaders within the school to be able to say, how are we going to use this? Now what? Having conversations about the results. So some guidelines that are helpful. Often people will be talking about who should take the survey, what teachers should have their students take the survey about them. Because you might have a librarian in one school that teaches a full class, and in another school they might not have not have specific students in a class. So it's hard to use that kind of designation. So we give you this guideline of plan instruction, deliver instruction, and assign grades, or potentially collaborate in the assignment of grades. And if somebody meets these criteria, then they should have students take the survey. And this will give you an idea of a teacher's assistant may not be somebody that would have students take the survey, but in some cases a lot of the other teachers would be. For proctors, teachers should not be proctoring their own surveys. They're switching classes. This is to allow student confidentiality and for them to feel as comfortable as they can taking the survey. We want to make this as easy a process as you can, so it could be just switching with somebody next door. It could be having an assistant, monitor the students as they come through. There's a variety of ways you can do it, but in general, they should not be proctoring their own surveys. So you're going to receive a packet at your school about 1 week prior to survey administration that contains proctor instructions for all teachers in your school. You will give out the instructions in the way that's easiest for you. Either you give them to the actual teacher, or you can give them to the proctor or the person administering their surveys. So we often get questions about accommodations. We have some guidance for special education and ELL students, which is that you can follow the TCAP or end of course accommodations, extended time, read aloud. We also have a survey an audio feature that I can show you, and then also a bilingual dictionary, small group, and any student can use that feature of the accommodation. So I'm going to briefly show you real quickly. I'm going to show you just what the survey looks like, and I'll show you an example of some of that audio function, where this is when students enter their token, they would come in, and they would choose their school here, and then you can see there's an audio function that you can play right here, which would have the directions read to them. So if they want to use headphones, they'll be able to have that. And then they'll go through, and this is where they enter in a teacher code. Each teacher will be assigned a 3-digit code, and these will all be in the proctor instructions. They'll verify these. Then they'll go through and answer a few questions about what grade they're in, how long they've been with that teacher's class. They'll then take a section which is kind of norming on our answers, in which it goes through and says, talks about the answer choices being always, almost always, and so forth. And they are asked if they understand it. And then we get into the actual survey. And again, you can see the audio function all throughout that students would be able to use. So for online administration, it's taken using a web browser. The websites that students visit is mystudentsurvey.com/student. If you did this administration last year, it's a little bit different. The reason we just wanted to make it a one-step process instead of going to our website and clicking take the survey, you just go straight to this website and it'll take you right to what I just showed you. Do you need internet access? And each user should have their own computer. And the instructions are read to the proctor prior to it. So we give instructions to each of those proctors that they then can read. So I mentioned a couple things about tokens and teacher codes. There's 2 types of codes used for administration, and all of these will be part of the proctor instructions. The tokens are a 6-digit number. It allows you to just make sure you go to the right survey, the one for Nashville, grades 3 through 4, and so forth. And so these are the tokens for this fall administration. These, again, will also be on all the proctor instructions. Students then select their from the drop-down menu, which I showed, and then there's that 3-digit teacher code that will be on the proctor instructions, unique to each teacher. So for a few administration guides, sometimes what may happen is that, let's say a roster is not fully updated that we get, and so we send you proctor instructions, and in some cases it might be that that teacher no longer works at that school. In that case, you can just discard the instructions. If you have a teacher that you need instructions for and there's not one there, whether because they're new or for whatever reason, we have a system in place that can help you for that. So you can actually create a teacher ID starting at 600. So for instance, if Ms. Jones doesn't have any instructions, she'd have 600. If Ms. Smith also didn't, you'd then assign her 601. We do need to make sure we get this list so that we can connect their results to that specific teacher. So you would just, in Excel format, just send that to support@mystudentsurvey.com, use the format below, and we'd be able to put them into our roster and make sure that they get their results. As you work through and you want to know a little bit more about tracking the number of responses in your building, you can get real-time results. There's a website, mystudentsurvey.com/portal, and you'll enter in your token, whether that's the 3 to 4 token or the 6 to 12 token, 5 to 12 token, where it says survey ID, and then you can also then enter in your school number, and you can see that in the drop-down that students take. And this is what it looks like here with the actual portal, where you'd enter your survey ID, your school number, and so forth. So a little bit of guidance. So in grades 3 through 4, it's a question of how often do they take the survey, how many times, and so forth. In grades 3 to 4, students will take the survey twice. One will be about their homeroom teacher, and one will be about a second teacher. Now, this could be the art teacher, a special ed teacher, ELL, music, etc. So what you could do is you had multiple third grade classes. They would take it about their homeroom teacher, And then the first third grade class could take it about the art teacher. The next third grade class could take it about the PE teacher, and so forth. So it's really each teacher will get one class of surveys about them, and we only have students take it twice because we really want to make sure that they're not experiencing survey fatigue, and we want to make sure that they're not taking away as much from instruction. So in grades 5 through 12, it's recommended that teachers have 2 classes take the survey about them. The way to make sure that they're not taking it too many times is, let's say you did all second period and all third period. The students would take it about whomever they're with during that time period. And if somebody had planning, they could then take it during fourth period. Schools have the option of having one class take the survey, so only second period. We really want to make sure that you have enough numbers, though, so we want to make sure you have at least 15 students take the survey. Teachers often want to have more students take it so it feels like more representative results instead of, hey, that was just my one bad class or whatever it is. But that is up to the discretion of the survey coordinator. So just some questions that we generally get. It's how long does it take? It's about 20 minutes, I think, you can think to complete the survey. There are some questions about practice, but there's also a couple school climate questions that are on there as well. They can use any web browser, Internet Explorer 7 and later, Firefox, Chrome, and so forth. There'll be a call-out message that's going to go out to parents talking about the survey, and it may mean that they want to opt out. The survey coordinator should keep a list of anybody that might opt out, and just make sure that they're not taking the survey, they have an alternative assignment and so forth. For reports, generally reports are back within 1 week. We're taking it right before Thanksgiving, so they'll be back the week right after Thanksgiving and be available for teachers. So we're going to get to questions in just a second. I did want to show you after this, we have some slides, and all these slides will be sent out to you guys, in which students, these are some sample slides you might be able to use for your faculty if you wanted to do a presentation at an upcoming session for 5-10 minutes, just to say kind of the why we're doing student surveys, talk about the screening procedures, talk about where the questions came from, give them some example questions, and then important information. We've really tried to boil down about what do we think is the information teachers are really going to want the most for this. So, and then we're going to get into a little bit of planning time now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. This is mostly informational time. Then we're going to stop, and I'm going to ask for questions, and then we'll go in some planning time. So I'm going to